Linda, my wife of 10 years, was waiting for me at the dining table when I got home from work on a Wednesday evening. Her expression alone told me something serious was coming. She gestured for me to sit down, and the moment I did, she started with those infamous words no one ever wants to hear. "We need to talk?" I braced myself. I'd read enough to know this was rarely the start of anything good. She took a deep breath and began, "I want you to know that I love you, and I would never do anything to damage our marriage." My stomach dropped. Whatever this was, it wasn't going to be good. I've decided I want to take a lover," she said after a pause, her voice oddly calm. I blinked, stunned. "Let me get this straight. You love me, you don't want to damage our relationship, but you want to sleep with someone else?" I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. She winced but pressed on. "I've met someone, and it's just a physical thing. It would be occasional, and I promise I'd always be upfront with you about it. I love you enough to know this won't change how I feel about you. If you love me as much as you say you do, you'll understand that this is something I need to do." I stared at her, trying to process the absurdity of her words. "And you think this won't affect us?" I asked, incredulous. "Have you already made plans with this lover of yours?" She nodded, almost casually. Tentatively, we were planning to go away for the weekend. Next weekend, actually. I could feel my blood boiling. "Let me ask you this. How would you react if I came to you with the same proposal?" Linda hesitated, her eyes darting away from mine. I could tell she was scrambling for a response. I think I'd be okay with it, as long as it didn't affect our marriage," she finally said, though her voice wavered. I leaned forward, my tone icy. "You know full well you'd lose your mind if I ever suggested something like this. Don't lie to me." She flinched, visibly taken aback. I didn't think you'd get this angry. I thought you'd love me enough to let me do something that's important to me." "Whatever you're smoking must be illegal," I snapped. "You actually thought I'd be okay with you sleeping with someone else? That I'd just sit at home twiddling my thumbs while you're off spending the weekend screwing another man?" She looked down at her hands, her confidence faltering. "Maybe I didn't think this through enough," she admitted softly. "Yeah, you think?" I retorted. "Let me be clear. If you go through with this, we're done. Take a few days to think about whether this is really what you want. We'll talk Sunday afternoon." With that, I stormed off to our bedroom, grabbing my things and moving into the guest room. Linda followed, her voice quivering as she asked, "What are you doing?" "I'm not sleeping in the same bed as someone who's more interested in screwing someone else than working on our marriage," I spat before slamming the door. I didn't sleep much that night, but one thing became crystal clear to me. If Linda went through with this, our marriage was over. By morning, I had a plan. The next day, I left the house at my usual time but didn't say a word to Linda. Instead of going to work, I called in and requested 2 personal days. I had a lot to get done. My first stop was an electronics store, where I purchased 3 voice-activated recorders and a phone tap recorder. I placed one recorder near the home phone, another in the bedroom, and the third in her car. The phone tap was easy to set up, and as the account holder on our shared cell plan, I obtained her call logs without issue. Then, I hacked into her email accounts. Most were empty, but I found a secondary account I hadn't known about. The password was easy to guess, and what I found there was both damning and enraging. She and her lover, Frank Jones, a coworker, had been emailing back and forth, making plans for their upcoming weekend rendezvous. While it seemed they hadn't yet slept together, their intentions were clear. I set up her email to forward any new messages directly to me, ensuring she wouldn't notice a thing. Before the day was over, I planted GPS trackers in her car and wallet. By the end of the day, I had everything I needed to monitor her every move. On Friday, I took my evidence to a divorce attorney who assured me we had a strong case for adultery. I showed him the emails, phone records, and explained my plans to gather audio evidence as well. "This is more than enough to start," he said confidently. "Let's get the ball rolling." That evening, I ignored Linda completely. When she started cooking dinner, I left for a bar and didn't come back until late. She tried to talk to me when I returned, but I brushed past her and locked myself in the guest room. By Sunday afternoon, it was time to talk. We sat at the kitchen table, and I let her go first. She fumbled with her words, clearly trying to justify her actions. I cut her off. Let me make this simple, I said coldly. There is no scenario where I'll ever be okay with this. You've already damaged our marriage, and it's not something I'll ever forget. Linda looked at me, tears welling up in her eyes. But I wasn't done. If you go through with this, we're done. No discussions, no second chances. So decide, do you want this lover, or do you want your marriage? Linda sat across the table from me, her expression a mix of frustration and determination. I can see you're very angry, she started. But if you had just looked at it from my point of view, maybe you'd be a little more receptive. I folded my arms, staring at her in disbelief. Oh, I've tried, Linda. I really have. But no matter how I twist or turn this in my head, there's no way any good can come from it. My answer has to be no. Her face twisted with indignation. How could you be so selfish? If you love me, shouldn't you want me to be happy? I shook my head, fighting back the wave of anger surging through me. Selfish? Me? Let's not twist this around, Linda. You wanting to sleep with another man, someone you've clearly been fantasizing about, is the very definition of selfish, and it's the most disrespectful thing I've ever heard. She leaned forward, lowering her voice but keeping that same infuriating tone of justification. And what happens if I go through with it anyway? I stared at her, letting the silence stretch out to drive the weight of my words home. Then there will be serious consequences, I said, my voice cold and steady. You and I took vows 10 years ago, vows that meant we would stay exclusive. If you break them, our marriage is over. Period. She sighed deeply, as if I were the one being unreasonable. I know what we said, but this is something I feel like I have to do. I stood up, shaking my head in exasperation. Then this conversation is over. I've said all I can say. Without waiting for her reply, I grabbed my keys and headed out the door. I needed air, space away from her. I took my laptop to a nearby cafe and parked myself at a quiet corner table. Logging into her email, I scanned through her correspondence with Frank Jones, her so-called lover. The messages were sickeningly confident, arrogant, even. They confirmed their plans for the weekend. Frank had already reserved a room at the Hilton in Kansas City, room 125, for Friday and Saturday nights. Linda assured him, yet again, that she was definitely going. They were beyond caring about my objections, already planning their little romantic getaway as if I didn't exist. I smirked to myself, an idea forming. If Frank thought he could sneak around with my wife, I'd make damn sure he regretted it. I logged into the Hilton website and reserved room 125 for Thursday night. It was almost too easy. While they were busy playing lovebirds, I'd be 2 steps ahead, collecting everything I needed. As I ate a quick dinner at the cafe, I watched their messages in real time. They were planning not just their nights but a romantic Saturday dinner, complete with dancing. Linda even mentioned she'd bought sexy new underwear, just for Frank. That detail stung more than I'd care to admit. By Wednesday night, I knew this was my last chance to stop her. If she went through with it, there was no turning back. We need to talk, I told her after dinner, motioning for her to sit at the kitchen table. She rolled her eyes but complied, sitting down with a huff. Have you given any more thought to this? I asked, keeping my tone calm. I have, she replied flatly, and I still want to do it. I leaned forward, narrowing my eyes. Linda, I'm begging you to reconsider. Don't destroy our marriage for some fling. This is your last chance. Her expression didn't waver. I'm going with Frank on Friday afternoon. I'll be back Sunday, and I hope we can move past this. The finality in her voice hit like a slap. I stood up slowly, my chair scraping against the floor. So, you've chosen Frank over me, I said, my voice heavy. That tells me everything I need to know. Without another word, I walked out and slammed the door to the guest room behind me. Thursday morning, I left the house at my usual time, barely sparing Linda a glance. My first stop was my boss's office, where I explained I needed time off to finalize my divorce. He looked shocked but supportive, telling me to take all the time I needed. From there, I drove to Kansas City and checked into room 125. With the privacy I needed, I installed 2 small, fiber-optic HD cameras in strategic spots, ensuring I could capture everything that happened. I tested the cameras with my laptop, moving around to make sure they picked up all angles. Everything was perfect. This was going to be more than just evidence for the divorce. It was ammunition. By the time I left, I had their entire weekend's tryst covered. On the way back, I made one more stop, a gun store. I didn't need a weapon. I wasn't going to stoop to that level, but I did pick up a can of pepper spray. I had a plan, and this little can was going to make sure their romantic date ended in misery. When I got home, Linda was in the kitchen. She looked up at me expectantly, as if waiting for me to say something. I walked past her without a word, slamming the guest room door behind me. She followed me in a few minutes later, trying to be friendly, but I cut her off. "Save it for Frank," I snapped. "I don't need your pity." She left in silence, and I spent the rest of the night going over my plan. Friday morning, I made one final trip to my lawyer's office. I signed the divorce papers and ensured everything was in order to have Linda served at work on Monday. I also requested Frank be served simultaneously, suing him for alienation of affection. My lawyer, impressed with the evidence I'd gathered, assured me it would all be taken care of. Later, I returned to the house while Linda was out, likely getting her hair done. I rifled through her suitcase, finding the infamous sexy new underwear. They were admittedly attractive, but I wasn't about to let her enjoy them with Frank. Wearing rubber gloves, I pulled out the can of pepper spray and gave a generous spritz to the crotch of her panties and the cups of her bra. Smiling grimly, I packed everything back neatly. This was going to be fun. I started my Friday by taking care of some important business. First, I went to the bank and closed all our joint accounts, moving the cash into a new account under just my name. Then, I canceled all the credit cards we shared. By the time I was done, I was feeling a small sense of satisfaction. With that handled, I went home, knowing I'd likely catch Linda getting ready for her weekend getaway with Frank. It was 12:30 when I walked into the house. Linda was nowhere to be seen, but I could hear faint noises coming from upstairs. Figuring she was in our bedroom, I made my way up. I opened the door to find her standing in the middle of the room, wearing sexy lingerie I had given her years ago. She froze, trying to cover herself up, but I waved her off. "Don't be stupid," I said, my voice dripping with disdain. "It's nothing I haven't seen before." She looked startled, her face painted with guilt and a touch of defiance. Her hair was styled perfectly, her makeup flawless. She looked incredible, no doubt trying to impress Frank. "You look great," I told her, my voice laced with sarcasm. "Too bad you never put this much effort into looking good for me." "It's not like that," she stammered. I wanted to feel sexy today." I shook my head. "For him, though, right? Not for me." I stepped closer, taking her left hand in mine. She tensed as I started to slip off her rings. "You know, I loved you with all my heart. I gave you this ring on the day we got married. We made vows, Linda, vows to forsake all others. That meant something to me. Clearly, it doesn't mean much to you." Her face crumbled as I pocketed both her wedding band and the engagement ring. "The engagement ring was my mother's," I said coldly. "I'll keep it. I don't want it on your hand while you're stroking another man's tool." Linda didn't argue. She looked stunned, probably realizing how serious I was. I let go of her hand and stepped back. "I won't be here when he comes to pick you up," I told her, my tone firm. "But he is not allowed in this house. If you let him in, Linda, I swear to God, I will castrate him and make sure no man ever looks at you again. That's a promise." Her eyes widened and she stammered, I won't let him in. I promise." "Good. I'll be watching," I said. "Why am I like this, you ask?" "Because the love of my life just trashed our marriage. I hope your little weekend is worth it." With that, I turned and walked out. She called after me, but I didn't look back. I was done. I parked my car down the street where I had a clear view of the house. I didn't have to wait long before Frank's car pulled up. He strolled up to the door and rang the bell. A moment later, Linda stepped out, suitcase in hand. She dropped it on the ground and wrapped her arms around his neck, giving him a long, deep kiss. I watched as he picked up her suitcase, and then Linda turned to look my way, a smug grin plastered on her face. She climbed into the car, sitting close to him. and gave me one last mocking look as they drove past. I flipped her off, and the smugness melted from her face. I drove back to the house, changed all the locks, and updated the garage door code. Then I grabbed the suitcase I had packed earlier and headed to Kansas City. After checking into my room at the Hilton, I set up my laptop to monitor the cameras I'd installed in their room. The feed was already active. I nearly burst out laughing at what I saw. Linda was naked on the bed, and it was clear that Frank had already had his way with her. He came out of the bathroom, also naked, and I couldn't help but laugh at the size of his equipment. Let's just say Linda was used to more substantial company. Frank climbed back into bed, ready for round two, and Linda opened her arms with a forced smile. As I watched her try to act enthusiastic, I could see the frustration on her face. He barely lasted 4 minutes. By the look on Linda's face, I could tell this weekend wasn't living up to her expectations. Satisfied with the footage I'd captured so far, I left everything recording and went out for dinner and a few drinks. When I came back, Frank was asleep and Linda was lying beside him, looking more annoyed than ever. This was better than I could have hoped for. The woman who had traded in her loving husband for a weekend fling was coming up empty. I went to bed that night with a smile on my face, already planning my next moves. By morning, I was refreshed and ready for more fun. After a quick shower and breakfast, I decided to send Linda a little message. I called a local florist and ordered a bouquet of flowers, the same kind I'd given her every year on our anniversary. There wouldn't be another anniversary, so I figured it was a fitting farewell. I requested the bouquet be delivered to room 125 at 11 a.m. The timing couldn't have been better. I watched through the camera as Linda and Frank returned to the room, kissing and giggling. They were just getting into bed when there was a knock at the door. Linda wrapped a sheet around herself and answered it, receiving the bouquet. Her smile faded as she read the card, and her expression turned into a mix of confusion and anger. A few seconds later, my phone buzzed. I answered it casually. "Hello? Did you send me flowers?" Linda's voice was tight. I laughed. "Not worth a guess, huh? My wife is off screwing some other guy, and you think I'd send flowers? If I sent you anything, it'd be a bouquet of ragweed with a note that says, 'To my cheating wife.'" "That's not funny," she snapped. "Neither is what you're doing," I shot back. "Maybe your little boyfriend can cheer you up." I hung up, ignoring her repeated calls after that. She told Frank what I'd said, and he assured her that I'd get over it. She wasn't in the mood for more sex, but eventually, she gave in. Right as things were heating up again, I called a local pizza shop and ordered Linda's favorite pizza for delivery. It arrived just as Frank was about to start another round. He was furious, but the delivery guy insisted he had the correct room number and phone number. Frank paid, seething. Linda was starting to connect the dots. She realized I'd hacked into her emails, and I could see the panic setting in. They decided to go out for a while to cool off. As they left, I couldn't stop laughing. This was just the beginning. I had tears streaming down my face as I watched their evening unfold from the camera feed. They returned to their room, looking happy, their romantic night in full swing, or so they thought. After showering, Linda slipped into her sexy lingerie, strutting around the room to model for Frank. He seemed eager, trying to pull her back into bed, but she stopped him, saying she wanted to enjoy their planned date night first. What they didn't know was that my surprise was about to announce itself in a painful way. Linda finished dressing and looked stunning. I won't deny that. It stung a little to see her putting in so much effort for someone else, but I knew she'd soon regret it. They left for their dinner, and I sat back, patiently waiting for the aftermath. About an hour later, the happy couple returned to their room. Within minutes, Linda darted into the bathroom, tearing off her lingerie and jumping into the shower. She stayed in there for a long time. When she finally came out, her face was twisted in discomfort, her chest and crotch visibly bright red. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. She flopped onto the bed, moaning in pain, and when Frank tried to touch her, she snapped, shouting that she was in too much pain to deal with him. She blamed her misery on an allergic reaction to her new lingerie. Little did she know, I had given her that special surprise with the pepper spray. Frank, clearly annoyed, tried to console her, but you could tell he wasn't getting the evening he had hoped for. By the look on Linda's face, the entire weekend was unraveling into frustration and regret. Meanwhile, I spent the rest of the evening organizing all the videos, emails, and text logs I had collected into neat little packages for both my lawyer and Frank's wife. It was shaping up to be a very productive day. As I climbed into bed that night, I couldn't help but smile. Trouble in paradise? Mission accomplished. The next morning, I packed up and headed home. Linda was in for a rude awakening when she returned. Later that afternoon, Frank dropped her off. He didn't even bother helping her carry her suitcase to the door. He just drove off the moment she stepped out. I was on the couch, watching football, and didn't even acknowledge her as she walked in. "I'm home," she announced, attempting to sound cheerful. When I didn't respond, she stepped in front of the TV, blocking my view, and gave me a forced, flirty smile. "I thought you'd be happy to see me." "Happy?" I replied, not bothering to hide my disdain. "Why on earth would you think that? Do I look like I've suddenly gotten stupid over the past few days? Because I know you did." She flinched, but recovered quickly. "I thought you loved me enough to move past this." I scoffed. "Loved? Past tense. You broke my heart, Linda. You threw away everything we had for a weekend with Frank. You thought I'd just forgive and forget?" "I realize now that I made a huge mistake," she pleaded. "I'll do anything to make it up to you." "Anything?" I challenged, raising an eyebrow. "All right, get down on your knees." Her face turned red. "You know I can't do that." "Exactly. So much for anything. Your promises are as worthless as the ones you made on our wedding day." She tried again. "I thought about you the whole way home. I really want to make love to you tonight. I need you." I laughed bitterly. "You need me? Did you and little Frankie use protection? Every time?" "No, but he's married, and I can't get pregnant." I stared at her in disbelief. "You seriously think that's okay? That's your defense? Linda, you're damaged goods. I wouldn't touch you until you get a clean bill of health from a doctor. And even then, I don't do seconds." "Frank is clean," she protested. "Right, because you'd take the word of a man who lied to his wife and slept with you. And you expect me to use protection with my own wife after that? No, thank you." I grabbed my keys. "I'm going out for a while. I can't even look at you right now. Sleep in the guest room tonight." "This is my bed too," she snapped. "Not anymore. You gave up that right when you slept with Frank. Now get out, or I'll throw you out." Tears welled in her eyes, but I didn't budge. She left the room, sobbing. I locked the door behind her, shutting her out of my life. The next morning, I ignored her completely. As she left for work, she turned to me with tears in her eyes and said, "I love you." "I loved you too," I replied coldly, making sure to emphasize the past tense. Once she was gone, I packed all her belongings into garbage bags and left them by the front door. Then, I made a call to Frank's wife. She had no idea about her husband's weekend escapades and was furious when I offered her my evidence. When I arrived at her house to drop it off, I was stunned. She was gorgeous, far more attractive than Linda, and had a sharp wit to match. We hit it off immediately. After discussing the situation, she agreed to join me at my lawyer's office. Not only did we file the necessary divorce papers, but she also decided to divorce Frank and sue him for alienation of affection. That afternoon, Linda called me, screaming about the divorce papers. "I can't believe you did this," she yelled. "I told you there would be consequences," I said calmly. "Maybe you should have thought about that before screwing Frank." When she came home that evening, I recorded her meltdown as she screamed and raged in the driveway. Once she finally calmed down, I laid it out for her one last time. "You destroyed this marriage, Linda, not me. I begged you not to do this, and you chose Frank anyway. I loved you, but now it's over. You're free to live your life without me." As she packed her things into her car, I handed her the flattened wedding ring. "It's just scrap gold now," I said, my voice hollow. Then, in a moment of weakness, I leaned in and kissed her on the forehead. "Goodbye, Linda." As I watched her drive away, tears blurred my vision. I cried for what felt like hours, mourning the love I had lost. But as the pain subsided, I knew I had to move on. Dear readers, here's the question I leave with you. Can a broken trust like this ever truly be repaired? Or is it better to cut ties and start anew? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more.